Every Sunday night, you feel it. That sinking sensation in your chest. That quiet dread about Monday morning. You tell yourself everyone feels this way. You convince yourself it's normal to spend 5 days waiting for 2. You rationalize that this is just what adult life looks like. But deep down, you know something is wrong. Not with the world, with you. Because other people seem fine. They seem engaged with their work. They seem excited about their plans. They seem to have found their place. So you start diagnosing yourself. Maybe you have depression. Maybe you lack discipline. Maybe you're just not cut out for success. You search for the defect that explains why you can't seem to feel satisfied with a life that looks perfectly acceptable from the outside. Here's what happens next. You double down. You try harder. You force yourself to be more grateful. You tell yourself to stop complaining. You push through the resistance, and the more you push, the worse you feel. Because you're operating from a faulty assumption. You think the problem is your inability to be happy with what you have. But the real problem is that you're trying to thrive in conditions that were never designed for you. You're not broken. Your capacity for joy isn't damaged. Your ability to find meaning isn't defective. You're just exhausting yourself trying to force a life that doesn't fit, and your entire system is rebelling against that mismatch. But here's the truth that changes everything. Once you understand the difference between being broken and being misaligned, you can stop fixing yourself and start finding your actual direction. Here's how we're going to do that. First, we'll uncover 5 invisible patterns that make you believe dissatisfaction means defectiveness. These are cultural messages, so deeply embedded that you don't even recognize them as messages. Then we'll dive into the fascinating neuroscience of why your brain creates that persistent wrongness feeling when you're on someone else's path. But most importantly, I'm going to walk you through 8 evidence-based strategies you can implement immediately to distinguish your authentic path from prescribed ones. These aren't philosophical abstractions. They're concrete techniques backed by behavioral science that help you recognize what's actually yours versus what you've been told should be yours. By the end of this video, you'll know exactly why trying harder hasn't worked. You'll understand the biological mechanisms creating your discomfort, and you'll have specific tools to find alignment without needing to make reckless changes or convince yourself you're uniquely flawed. So where does all this come from? This understanding comes from decades of research across multiple disciplines. Psychologist Martin Seligman at the University of Pennsylvania pioneered the study of learned helplessness. His research shows that when people feel powerless to change their circumstances, they stop trying. But here's what matters for you. That helplessness isn't always about external obstacles. Sometimes it's about being in situations that fundamentally conflict with who you are. Organizational psychologist Adam Grant at Wharton has spent years studying what makes work meaningful. He found that meaningfulness doesn't come from the type of work itself. It comes from alignment between your personal values and how you spend your time. When that alignment breaks, no amount of external success compensates for the internal mismatch. Neuroscientist Matthew Lieberman at UCLA discovered something crucial about identity. Your brain has specific networks dedicated to understanding who you are. When your actions contradict your sense of self, those networks light up with conflict signals. That conflict manifests as discomfort, anxiety, and the feeling that something is fundamentally wrong. The philosopher Jean-Paul Sartre wrote extensively about what he called bad faith. Living according to others' expectations while pretending those expectations are your authentic choices. His work helps explain why you can be objectively successful and still feel like you're living a lie. Let's examine the specific patterns that convince you misalignment equals brokenness. The first pattern is the normalization of misery. You're surrounded by messages that work is supposed to be hard, that relationships require sacrifice, That feeling unfulfilled is just part of being mature. These messages teach you to interpret unhappiness as character building, rather than as useful information. Research from organizational psychologist Amy Rozesniewski at Yale shows that people fall into 3 categories regarding work. Some see it as a job, some see it as a career, some see it as a calling. But here's what's interesting. The category doesn't depend on the type of work. It depends on how the work aligns with personal meaning. When you're in the wrong path, you experience it as a job no matter how impressive it looks. You do it for the paycheck or the status. And when you feel empty despite the success, you conclude something is wrong with your capacity for satisfaction. You never consider that you're simply in the wrong category for you. The second pattern is the achievement addiction cycle. You were taught that accomplishment leads to fulfillment. So when you accomplish something and don't feel fulfilled, you decide you need to accomplish more. Bigger promotion, better relationship, nicer house. You keep chasing the next thing, thinking it will finally fix the emptiness. Psychologist Laurie Santos at Yale teaches a course on happiness that became the most popular class in the university's history. Her research reveals that people consistently overestimate how much achievement will improve their well-being. We think getting the thing will make us happy, but the happiness fades within weeks or months. Then we're back to baseline, confused about why it didn't work. This creates a trap. You keep achieving, you keep feeling empty, you interpret the emptiness as personal failure. You never stop to ask whether you're pursuing the wrong achievements entirely. The third pattern is social proof overriding internal signals. Everyone around you is following similar paths. College, career, marriage, house, kids. When you follow the same path and feel wrong, you assume the problem is you. Because if the path were wrong, wouldn't everyone feel this way? But psychologist Solomon Asch's famous conformity experiments show how powerful social pressure is. People will deny what they clearly see with their own eyes if everyone else in the room disagrees with them. You're doing the same thing with your life. You're denying what you clearly feel because everyone else seems fine with the standard path. You see your friends posting about their lives. They look happy. They look certain. So you conclude that your uncertainty means something is broken in you. You don't consider that they might be performing happiness while feeling just as lost as you are. The fourth pattern is the identity investment trap. You've spent years becoming who you are. You've told your story a certain way. You've built skills. You've formed relationships based on this identity. Admitting the path is wrong feels like admitting your entire identity is wrong. Psychologist Dan Gilbert at Harvard studies something called the end of history illusion. People acknowledge they've changed dramatically in the past, but they believe they'll stay basically the same in the future. This makes change feel like betrayal rather than evolution. When you consider changing paths, you think about all the people who know you as this person. Your parents, who are proud of your career, your partner who married this version of you, your colleagues who respect your expertise. Changing feels like letting everyone down. So you stay, and you interpret the misery of staying as evidence of your brokenness. The fifth pattern is the toxic positivity trap. You're told to focus on gratitude, to count your blessings, to recognize how lucky you are. All of this is well-intentioned, but it teaches you to suppress legitimate dissatisfaction. It teaches you that if you're unhappy despite having good things, you're ungrateful. According to research by psychologist Susan David at Harvard, emotional suppression doesn't work. When you push feelings down, they don't disappear. They intensify, they leak out in other ways. Trying to force yourself to be grateful for something that's fundamentally wrong for you creates internal conflict, not peace. Now let's explore why your brain creates this sense of wrongness. Understanding the mechanism helps you see it's not pathology, it's communication. The first mechanism is what neuroscientists call predictive processing. Your brain is constantly generating predictions about what will happen next based on your goals and values. When reality matches predictions, you feel a sense of rightness. When reality contradicts predictions, you feel dissonance. Neuroscientist Carl Jung's work shows that your brain is essentially a prediction machine trying to minimize surprise. When you're on your authentic path, your predictions align with outcomes. You expect to feel engaged. You do. You expect to feel energized. You do. The system works smoothly. But when you're on the wrong path, your predictions never match outcomes. You expect fulfillment from achievements. You don't get it. You expect meaning from your daily work. You don't find it. This constant prediction error creates a background hum of wrongness. Your brain is trying to tell you the model doesn't fit the data. The second mechanism is values-action misalignment. Psychologist Stephen Hayes developed acceptance and commitment therapy based on this insight. When your daily actions don't reflect your core values, you experience psychological distress, not because you're mentally ill, because you're living incongruently. Think of your values like a compass. When you're walking north but the compass points south, you feel disoriented. That disorientation isn't a malfunction. It's information. Your internal compass is trying to redirect you. But instead of checking the compass, you conclude the compass is broken. Hayes' research with thousands of clients shows that values clarification alone reduces anxiety and depression, not because it solves external problems, because it helps people recognize when they're moving in the wrong direction. The anxiety wasn't random. It was purposeful communication. The third mechanism is autonomy deprivation. Psychologists Edward Deci and Richard Ryan spent decades developing self-determination theory. Their research shows that humans have three basic psychological needs: autonomy, competence, and relatedness. When these needs aren't met, well-being suffers dramatically. Autonomy means feeling like your choices are genuinely yours, not coerced, not manipulated, not based on what you should want. When you're following a path that never felt like your choice, you're autonomy deprived, even if the path is objectively good. Deci and Ryan's studies show that people who feel autonomous are happier, healthier, and more engaged, even when their circumstances are more challenging than people who lack autonomy. The feeling of choice matters more than the ease of the path. When you're on someone else's path, you're missing that fundamental need, and your system knows it. The fourth mechanism is identity coherence disruption. Psychologist Dan McAdams studies life narratives, how people construct stories about who they are. His research reveals that psychological health depends partly on having a coherent narrative. When your life story makes sense to you, you feel stable. When it doesn't, you feel fragmented. Following the wrong path creates narrative incoherence. You can't tell a story about your life that feels authentic. You describe what you do, but it doesn't connect to who you are. This fragmentation shows up as that feeling of being lost, of not recognizing yourself, of wondering where the real you went, now for what actually works. These strategies help you find your authentic path without pathologizing your dissatisfaction. Map your energy, not your achievements. Most people track accomplishments. Few people track energy. But according to research from organizational psychologist Jane Dutton at the University of Michigan, energy is a more reliable indicator of fit than success. Here's the practice. For 2 weeks, track what gives you energy and what drains it. Not what you're good at, not what makes money. What makes you feel more alive versus more depleted. At the end of each day, write down your 3 highest energy moments and 3 lowest energy moments. Patterns will emerge. Maybe you're energized by solving problems, but drained by small talk. Maybe you're energized by helping individuals, but drained by managing systems. This data tells you about values, not just preferences. It shows you what your system is designed for. Run identity experiments, not career experiments. Most people test jobs or roles. But according to psychologist Herminia Ibarra at London Business School, That's backwards. You need to test identities. Ways of being in the world, not just ways of earning money. Try this approach. Identify 3 possible selves, not job titles. Ways of living. Maybe one possible self is creative and unstructured. Another is analytical and systematic. Another is relational and flexible. Spend 1 week emphasizing each identity in small ways. During Creative Week, take a different route to work. Rearrange your space. Try a new recipe without a recipe. During Analytical Week, create spreadsheets for something. Research a topic deeply. Organize a system. Notice which identity feels like coming home versus which feels like wearing someone else's clothes. Practice strategic quitting, not just persistence. Psychologist Angela Duckworth's research on grit became hugely popular, but less discussed is her work on when to quit. According to Duckworth, successful people are strategic quitters. They quit the wrong things so they can persist at the right things. Make a quit list. Write down everything you're doing that drains you without supporting your values. Then ask for each item, what would happen if I stopped? Often the answer is nothing catastrophic. You just disappoint people who want you to keep doing something that was never yours. Start with one small quit. Maybe you quit the committee you joined to look good. Maybe you quit the hobby you never enjoyed but felt you should enjoy. Notice what happens. Usually, quitting the wrong things creates space and energy for the right things to emerge. Distinguish between growth pain and damage pain. Clinical psychologist Tara Brach teaches that not all discomfort signals wrongness. Growth creates discomfort. So does damage. You need to know the difference. Growth pain feels like stretching, scared but alive, uncertain but curious. It creates tension, but also possibility. Damage pain feels like shutting down, numb but anxious, resigned but restless. It creates hopelessness, not just uncertainty. When you're considering a change, check which pain you're in. If you're in growth pain, the path might be right even though it's hard. If you're in damage pain, the path is probably wrong even if it looks good. Trust the quality of the discomfort, not just the presence of it. Build a personal board of advisors. Psychologist Adam Grant writes about the importance of challenging networks. People who question your assumptions rather than just supporting your decisions. When you're trying to find your path, you need advisors who know you well enough to spot misalignment. Identify 3 to 5 people who've seen you at your best, not your most successful, your most alive. Ask them what they notice about those moments. What qualities were you expressing? What made you different? These observations give you external data about who you are when you're not performing, when you're not trying to be who you should be. They help you separate your authentic self from your adapted self. Create what psychologists call implementation intentions. Research from psychologist Peter Gollwitzer shows that specific if-then plans dramatically increase follow-through. Vague intentions rarely lead to change. Concrete plans do. Don't just decide to explore new paths. Create specific if-then plans. If it's Tuesday evening, then I'll spend 30 minutes talking to someone in a field I'm curious about. If I feel that Sunday dread, then I'll journal about what specifically I'm dreading and whether it's growable or changeable. These plans remove the decision-making burden in the moment. You're not relying on motivation, you're relying on pre-commitment. This makes exploration easier when you're tired or discouraged. Practice what researcher Brené Brown calls the story rumble. When you feel broken, you're telling yourself a story. I'm defective. I'm incapable of satisfaction. Something is fundamentally wrong with me. Brown's research shows that you can question these stories without denying your feelings. Write down the story you're telling about why you feel wrong. Then ask, what if this story isn't true? What's another explanation? What if I'm not broken, but misplaced? What if my dissatisfaction is wisdom, not weakness? This isn't about toxic positivity. It's about recognizing that the brokenness narrative is one interpretation, not the only interpretation, and probably not the most accurate one. Use the 10-10-10 rule for decisions. Business writer Susie Welch developed this framework. When facing a choice, ask how you'll feel about it in 10 minutes, 10 months, and 10 years. This helps you separate immediate fear from long-term alignment. In 10 minutes, quitting might feel terrifying. In 10 months, you might feel relieved. In 10 years, you might feel grateful, or the opposite. The pattern tells you whether you're avoiding good discomfort or recognizing bad fit. Apply this to decisions about staying or leaving, about speaking up or staying quiet, about following expectations or trusting yourself. The timeline perspective helps you see beyond the immediate emotional reaction to the deeper truth. Here's what I need you to hear. The discomfort you're feeling isn't evidence of brokenness. It's evidence of awareness. It means you're not willing to sleepwalk through a life that doesn't fit. Most people never question whether their path is actually theirs. They assume unhappiness is normal. They assume everyone feels this way. You're different. You're paying attention. That's not a flaw. That's courage. According to research from psychologist Todd Kashdan at George Mason University, people who tolerate uncertainty and stay curious actually achieve better outcomes than people who force premature certainty. Your not knowing isn't a problem. It's a prerequisite for finding what's actually true for you. I want to hear from you. What's one thing you're doing right now that you know isn't yours, but you are afraid to quit? Drop it in the comments. Sometimes naming it out loud is the first step toward changing it. And if this video helped you see your struggles differently, share it with someone who's been beating themselves up for not being happy with a life that looks good on paper. Hit subscribe if you want more research-backed strategies for building a life that actually fits who you are. So here's what I want you to think about. What would change if you interpreted your dissatisfaction as data instead of dysfunction? What small experiment could you run this week to test whether a different direction might feel more aligned? And what if the wrongness you feel isn't about you being broken, but about you finally becoming ready to build something authentic? You're not broken. You're not defective. You're not missing anything that everyone else has. You're just done pretending that someone else's path can ever be yours. And that realization isn't the beginning of falling apart. It's the beginning of coming home to yourself.